Добрый вечер всем еще раз. Вдруг вы находитесь с нами в нашем общем оригинальном аудиоканале. На всякий случай еще раз повторю про перевод. Если вам хочется слушать дорожку на русском языке, вам нужно нажать на кнопку Interpretation или перевод, там выбрать русский канал. И вы услышите, как Анна, которая помогает нам сегодня с переводом, переводит речь Хоуп на русский язык. Также эта встреча записывается для того, чтобы потом мы могли выложить ее на YouTube-канал и в любой момент вернуться к ней. Поэтому, пожалуйста, постарайтесь выключить свои микрофоны во время записи для того, чтобы запись и звук были максимально чистыми. И сегодня мы очень рады на нашей последней встрече приветствовать Hope Ванг, художницу, ткачиху, а также создательницу Loom такого коворкингового пространства, в котором стоит станок TC2 или TC2, и на котором имеют возможность работать художники из Чикаго и также из сопряженных Чикаго городков и региона. Эта встреча проходит в рамках выставки Кристины Пашковой «Циклы, связей и действия». Выставка идет последние выходные, у вас просто буквально последний шанс посмотреть на этот проект до 2 марта включительно. И завтра в 19:00 Кристина проведет экскурсию по выставке и расскажет в последний раз про то, как создавался проект, как создавалось полотно, которое она показывает на этой выставке, и также про вообще, в принципе, специфику работы с текстилем и про то, как она делает это в своей практике. Поэтому, пожалуйста, не пропустите. Я оставлю ссылочку на регистрацию на экскурсию тоже в чате. And now, just to be super quick and do it in English as well, I just said that we are recording this meeting so that everyone could have a chance to return to it afterwards. Maybe someone didn't have time to join on Saturday, and we have quite a lot of requests like that afterwards. So people can go on YouTube and watch the video once again. And therefore, I asked to try and mute the microphone so that we can hear your voice without any interruptions. And afterwards, we can have Q&A where people can ask their questions and they can maybe post a comment as well if they don't feel like raising a hand or speak out loud. And this is our last meeting that is going on in terms of the exhibition, Cycles of Connections, Reaction, that is made by Kристина Пашкова. And tomorrow at 7 p.m. Moscow time, Kристина will hold a tour on the exhibition, and she will tell about her, the process of her working, the way she was weaving the piece that is presented on the exhibition, and also about a little more about her practice in general. So please, those of you who haven't seen the show yet, you're warmly welcome to join the tour that Kристина is going to hold at 7 p.m. Moscow time. And now, without further ado, I want to present Hope Wang, whom we're very happy to have here today. I want to say this evening, but we're in so different time zones, then it's going to be not super accurate. So Hope is an artist and weaver and also an entrepreneur who created this amazing loom room, a co-working space where artists can have an access to TC2 loom and create together the works using this loom, trying it sometimes maybe for the first time. And we're here to listen more about your practice and also to listen more about your way of working with other artists inside the small community that you built. So thank you so much, Hope, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And Kристина, thank you so much for also inviting me to be part of the online program. So I'm really happy to be here. And yes, the time zones are very different. So this is actually bright and early in the morning for me in Chicago, but I'm really happy to be here. So yeah, I will go ahead and share my screen. and we'll just get right into it. Okay. So I wanted to begin by thanking everyone who's come to join us today by thanking you to allow and hold space with me to share my practice with you today. What you're seeing here is a video of a day-to-day in the life shots of my current studio. I'm an artist and creative entrepreneur based in Chicago, where I attended art school and then continued to live and work in for the past 10 years. So I originally come from a photography and painting background, but it was in school where I first encountered a tapestry loom and then a multi-harness loom, and then finally a TC2 digital jacquard loom, which both those looms are pictured in the studio. And when I first encountered those looms, I was hooked. I loved weaving and have been using it as a place of study ever since. And currently now, as Christina mentioned, I currently co-direct a studio where we rent out the TC2 loom as well as the floor loom for um, rentals to artists to sample and experiment on for new ideas or different projects of their own. It's all very autonomous. We also host workshops and design warps, which is, for those who aren't familiar, the unwoven warp yarn that is installed on the loom before anyone weaves it. And all of those are meant to be experimental in color and material and change every rental cycle, which tends to be every 2 months. So yeah, that's the studio, which is also shared with my personal studio. So if you draw a line down the middle, one side is the co-working space and the other side is my personal studio. So they are very enmeshed together. So today I plan to talk about my own artwork and how the TC2 has become a site of complex exploration for me. So this loom, as many of you probably already know, has the capacity to read digital files as instructional code, and then it enables it to lift the threads according to your digital design. Compared to other hand looms, the weaver on a TC2 loom can control every single thread separately from the next, which essentially allows you to map pixels to thread. And my first introduction to digital weaving was taught through the translation of digital photographs. Many of us are taught with photographs first, perhaps partly because we live now in a time where we're using our camera phones on a daily basis and are much more familiar and therefore photographs are easier to reason about when teaching how to weave, which is, I think, a really interesting moment. Being able to render a photograph on the loom is a mark of technical understanding in many ways. So for me, it was only natural in the initial novelty of encountering the TC2 loom because I also came from a photographic background and I was just obsessed with using this particular tool to render cloth with a photographic quality. So here you can see on the left is an image of a woven window reflection, and on the right is the original source photo. Um, this is a series I've been slowly working on since 2018. So I've been making a habit of photographing closed storefronts for over the past almost decade. I photograph imagery around storefronts that are sort of caught in a moment of transition. So whether it's from business turnover, property displacement, or construction, what kind of defines all of them is often that the window, you can't see through it, which is often the function of a ground floor window space. So over time, After accumulating many images of these similar kinds of situations, I take on some of these images to the loom to translate into what I consider a woven illusion. So these weavings depict reflections of pedestrians and shuttered spaces, which is often suggested through motifs like blue tape, brown paper, plastic sheets, and sometimes spray painted plywood that bar the viewer's access to the realities that exist beyond the surface. When you see these in person, the closer you look, the more the image disappears. So you have to stand at a particular distance, or as we are today, mediated through a photograph when the house in the reflection appears. And often, um, what ends up being translated is really quite different from what I'm working within in the digital file. So on the left is a screenshot of what the digital file looks like when the loom is reading the instructions. And then on the right is the source imagery. So when you stand at a distance, or again, as we are today, seeing the work online, you'll tend to experience the photographic renderings most clearly. But the closer you walk to the piece itself, or when the angle of the light shifts, when you're standing at a different angle, the individual threads tend to cause a sort of moire effect, and that causes the image itself to register differently, or it again disperses entirely. So this experience of seeing, of having to be at the right place, at the right angle, at the right moment, kind of reflects the transitory nature of the subject for me. Vacant storefronts represent a state of transition, which is in between empty and in business. I capture these fleeting moments that are bound to shift through the tedious and repetitive process of weaving a state that feels immaterial. Line by line, this act of remembering becomes a sort of like tribute to a physical place that may no longer exist as it was in the moment that I photograph it. And it represents then some of my feelings about life and public space as a quickly changing theater for it, as a kind of living document of people living vibrant and different lives on top of each other. Much like the layers of perhaps a print, what you see on top isn't everything that is there. The storefront might represent 30 years of someone's business that shuttered, or the hopes of a new business that someone worked really hard to work on, or the obliteration of decades of a vibrant neighborhood's activity flattened into a parking lot. So if the building disappears and something entirely new is built on top, does it live in our memories only? So ultimately, even though this loom is capable of mapping pixels to threads, as I said earlier, something is always lost in translation. With the capability of our digital cameras, most cameras are able to capture a moment in time instantaneously and often without deliberate intention. At least for me, I'm taking hundreds of photos like every day. Um, but the resolution is also incredibly powerful. Most of the images I'm photographing on my phone are often 5,000 pixels wide at a minimum. And the loom that I currently work on is already incredibly powerful. And compared to many other looms, uh, some might even consider excessive, with 3,500 pixels in a very generous amount of threads. Somehow, yet compared to the source material, which is often photography for me, what I'm rendering always becomes a low resolution image. And inherently in this process of translation between image to textile, we are always losing something. I think it's especially apt for this talk as I'm presently speaking in English and simultaneously it's being translated very generously into Russian. And currently we're experiencing this translation, which I'm quite certain there's already a loss happening. And because that's often simply because few language have a one-to-one translation. When we translate meaning from one system to another, we have to use words that are relative to the origin point. And direct translations are often quite offset from the original meaning. So we use other words to fill in the space that might be missing. And I see this sort of as a ghosting. In the loss of translation, new meanings and connections are born. So a lot of my work features moments in public space, often as a pedestrian passing through the city. The work features brick and concrete and industrial walls with shadows and light playing off of it. And when I often use color to convey the passing of time across the woven space. So here in this photo, I've incorporated the three different shades of orange to sort of convey like a light sort of falling onto a building. And it, as you can see, is quite different from the original source image in the slide before it. But compared to the immediacy of a photograph, I think about the slow, deliberate action of accumulating time and light through laying single threads on top of each other. I think about what can be filled in the space where pixels have been lost, instead with color and with the soft twists of yarn and light bouncing off of the material. I think about how the long fringe can convey a breathlessness when the viewer walks by the piece and the wind moves with the unwoven threads, or how the bleach painted weaving gives it kind of this starry or fluttering look that couldn't have been designed into the digital file. Here on the left, I have also shared this woven piece, which was painted with fabric dye before it was installed onto the loom, allowing for random painted gestures that shift slightly once they're tightened onto the loom. I consider the possibility of taking the skeleton of an image, such as this shadow of a gate folding over the porch steps on the right, and designing a digital file as if it's also casting a shadow upon the painted warp. Letting the painting itself also become a different sort of shadow. I'm interested in what emerges and what itself maybe sort of fails to render clearly enough. So how does the material itself push forward or pull backward areas that might be recognizable? And then if you look at it from a different angle, what areas disappear? So, as I've stated from the beginning, I used to work a lot through the framework of mimicry. Attempting to make one thing appear as something entirely different was my sort of playful approach to pushing this loom to create something unexpected in textile. To render my own reflection in glass or to capture the sun setting across the building was sort of a way of holding on to something recognizable, but also something that was always slipping away from me. I find myself moving away from this instinct recently, yet while I'm mimicking material less, I also find myself still confusing the viewer in a very different way. I'm still looking at things on the verge of disappearing because I have a hard time letting go of anything. But this practice where I translate and edit from my life to photography to painting to weaving and then probably back again to life has humbled me in a lot of ways. And I've become a lot more interested in the approximations and in what is left behind and failure of getting it just right. And photography has always sort of been a daily practice in observing the world around me. Now, in my artistic process, I'm starting to approach the photograph less as an origin point and more now I think I'm trying to target, um, or less as an origin point that I'm trying to target and more of a proposal for something that I hope to become. In 2018 and 2019, going back in time, I worked a series of manual labor jobs. Often they meant like 12-hour shifts in a screen printing factory, as well as working in a historical preservation company where I would spend 10-hour days restoring old windows and building facades. And so it put me on a lot of construction sites and industrial spaces, and which is also a common sort of image that you see in the city of Chicago. But it in that time, I was doing a lot of repetitive labor for hours on end. And as you probably know by now, through all these photographs of weavings, I am no stranger to repetitive labor. But on these jobs, I spent many hours doing the same physical activity. And it was during that time where I was also processing a lot of personal grief in my life. Which meant most of the time I was often crying on the job while also just cleaning, and scraping paint or washing screens. And at the end of a long day, the parking lot in the factory would empty out, and immediately, of course, everyone would rush home. But for me, in that quiet, empty space, it was often where I lingered and felt like the first time in my day that this my sense of self would re-register again as I watched the last rays of the sun setting against the wall. On the right, you see the pink wall is the image for the source photo that I digitally collaged with a different photo from a parking lot. So it's actually the photo itself, the source imagery is a collage, and this space in parts and pieces are real places, but the composition and thus, in many ways, my memory itself isn't necessarily accurate or real. And much of my work um, for me, having seen so many of these similar kinds of spaces and having photographed them over and over again, my emotional memory tends to linger in a fabricated space. It's a collage, an accumulation of all of those photos, and then I reference the original walls and the original parking lot into something different on the loom. So taking this source photo, I sort of wanted to think about the rust that's like dripping from the wall and the stained concrete to translate that into sort of the painting process. Once again, sort of making that painting on the left a little bit like watery and dripping in some ways. And in using the image as a guide for how I might preserve certain elements in the final piece, I sort of see them as a map in many ways. And here's an image of my painting across my painting process and what the painted warp looks like when it's on the loom. Here's another source photo of the image of a shadow falling of a gate falling onto the garage wall where I used to park my car in a previous apartment. I would pass by this wall every day, but depending on the time of day I'd encounter it, the shadows would appear and bend in different ways. And I have hundreds of images like this one as I started to notice these shadows more and more in 2020. And I would look forward often to encountering a different composition every time that I returned home or went out for a walk. So you can see here in this image that photo became a guide and cast another shadow into this painted weaving as well. Everything you've seen so far has taken several failed weavings that I didn't like before I arrived at the ones I've shown. I was deeply frustrated actually before I made this piece, and then when it just like arrived, when I finished weaving it, it just felt beyond what I could have imagined in Photoshop or even when I was painting. And I think some of the most creative processes have to contend with failure. You have to make something to know what you do and don't want the thing to be. And I think that speaks to the tension between remembering and rendering. What results is never quite the same as the thing we're trying to hold on to. And sometimes you find out that the thing you're trying to hold on to create something entirely new and unpredictable. And so through the quick practice of digital photography, paired with a slow and deliberate gesture of hand weaving, I use repetitive labor and um, repetition essentially to render the emotional weight of a memory and time passing. And through that, I render it into something that can be seen and felt. I find myself having to explain over and over again, often pulling up photos of me working in the process as proof to say that I made the thing with my hands. Often I think there's a misconception that maybe because of the digital loom, but also because it's so rendered, that people assume that the machine was the one that wove it. And I mean, in many ways, the machine also did make the thing with me, but as another module in the larger process of rendering an idea. I see these tools and these processes, digital photography, painting, hand weaving, as an additional apparatus or language through which we might find ourselves able to explore an entirely different way of working. I find myself having to especially implore other people, but most importantly myself, to broaden our imagination of what we can do when we slow down powerful machines and move a few steps away from maximum efficiency or maximum rendering so that we have room to examine the most interesting mistakes. And perhaps then we can see them less as misfires or tragic failures but as opportunities to discover something exciting. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hope. Yeah, it was a very interesting and super exciting presentation. So please, if you have some comments or questions right away, don't be shy and raise the hand or just post them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask them right away.
Yeah, thank you, Hope, for your presentation. I'm so happy that I have a chance to know your work in more, to know more about your works. And now, for instance, this piece that I saw so many times on your Instagram, but now it felt like, I don't know, I was in your studio in person and have a chat with you, and this is very precious for me. And I wanted maybe to ask you to speak a little bit more about these mistakes and also this productivity cult, because now I'm also working with colored warp, and for me it's now a struggle since I'm doing it for the first time and I'm don't feeling that I'm controlling the image. And this is so many overthinking from my side. And also I know with my brain that I should be open for any mistakes or occurrences that you are speaking about, but on the other hand, I'm feeling as a total failure. So yeah, if you share also your experience, have you ever had thoughts like this or something like this? I would appreciate.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. More failures than successes, for sure. And I mean, I know we've briefly talked about your painted warp that you put on, and it looked beautiful. And I think you should be really proud of having done that because it's really quite a challenge, to manage all of those threads and get it onto the loom without it being a total disaster, which I'm sure every weaver is also familiar with total disasters before it even gets onto the loom. And yeah, so I from what I've seen, it looks fantastic. And I ended up, the reason why I started to preserve the fringe at the bottom of a lot of these newer weavings is partly because I just loved how it turned out as a painting. And sometimes I often just wanted to like go back to that, like almost like erase like the woven part. I don't like how it turned out. And I'm like, let me just maybe unweave like 2 feet of the weaving because I think the painted part looked really good before I ruined it. Um, and so that has been an interesting moment of like, yeah, I still want to preserve this because I loved it before I wove it with something that I don't think I am really excited about. And so I did start to like, yeah, just find myself kind of going back to these moments like that I photographed really intentionally to remind myself like, oh, this is what it looked like before, and it transformed quite a bit once it's woven. And then like this here, I unwove. This piece was probably double the size actually, and I was so excited. I love this photo. I was really excited about the painted part, and I was like, this is gonna be so amazing. I'm gonna feel so proud of myself. After like 3 days of weaving constantly, it came off the loom, and I just felt so terrible. I was like, this looks bad. I don't like this. What did I do? I just like wasted all this time and energy and money to make this happen. And I think it's really important to sit with it and just really think about like what parts of it do you like, and what parts of it maybe need to be edited or just rolled away and reconsidered for next time.
Yeah,
So
Roy, yeah.
yeah. And so I have a lot of those. So I mean, so this one I ended up saving and I'm really, really happy with it now. Because I cut it in half and then I continued to unweave, the whole section down at the bottom because I think it lost the movement that I thought was really beautiful before it was woven. Which is really funny because yeah, once it's woven, it doesn't move in the same way. And I think that because I'm working with light, and thinking about weaving essentially light and shadow, I felt like it made sense to have the unwoven section have its own movement to feel like light, or the wind passing and rustling like the tree or like some sort of shadow. And so I think that was a moment of, again, like really tragic failure of me being so disappointed and thinking through other solutions of how to, preserve and maybe actually use that aspect that I don't like to really amplify something new. So here also, I wasn't really excited about going back from this amazing painted warp to just a black monochrome warp. And I ended up thinking like, oh, I'm weaving with this brilliant orange, and bleach also turns black threads to orange. And I could find a way to actually paint onto this weaving in a way that I couldn't have predicted or made that happen in a digital file. So again, kind of really finding ways for myself to be like, you know what, the part that I didn't like about these weavings are actually the really amazing opportunities to try something new. And partly when I don't like them, you're less attached to them being a specific way. So you have the confidence in some ways to actually just go in there and maybe bleach it or go in there and cut it up. And so I would say that for every photo of a finished nice weaving that I like that I've put into a presentation or a show, there's probably 5 other weavings that came off of that warp that I really don't like, or that I had to sit with for a year before I was like, okay, I know what we're gonna do with you, and I feel like I can have faith in you again. But yeah, it's a really different process to think about how the painting um, creates an entirely new and unpredictable variable when you're designing black and white files. So, I all I can say is it is absolutely natural that you feel like a failure and that you don't like most of what came off, even though you were very excited about what it looked like when it went onto the loom. And I think you just have to lean into like every next step, like how do you get closer and closer to the thing that you want it to become? And I try to sit with I try to cut it off the each piece off the loom so I can sit with it and sort of um yeah, figure out like what are we trying to hope for the next thing to be. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. There is a question in the chat. Mm,
Are you gonna read it or?
uh, yeah, if you could address your treatment of fringe over the years, how has it shifted and why?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Tali. Yeah, it's really quite shifted because as you can kind of see, in the beginning, these are early works and I framed them, so there's no fringe that you can see. And partly because I'm referencing windows, so I really, I try to finish my work in a way that is related to the subject, and I'm constantly trying to explore different ways to finish the work that fits the work and kind of continues the line of thinking in the concept. But also, just the practicality of exhibiting art, I want things to be able to travel and for someone else to handle it without being really scared that they're going to pull a thread or do anything like that. So I think framing was like a one of my ways of loving the perfect edge and the square, then the rectangle, and just having these really clean, everything looking really clean. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think I got so clean that people started to mistake these for machine woven pieces, or they mistook it for a print or a photograph. And it wasn't until they got really, really close that they're like, oh, it's a textile. Wait, it's a textile? Uh, and which I thought was a really wonderful, I enjoy that sort of moment where the illusion is broken. And that's part of kind of the subject is I'm hoping that you're gonna keep walking around it kind of confused until you figure out like what you're looking at. And what you're looking at then is just what tends to, I think, be a very unremarkable subject. And so I think that here I'm like it needs to be sleek in order to kind of preserve that illusion. But then in other works, I started to think about like I'm literally weaving light in some ways. Like through the color change of this brilliant orange with a darker orange, it looks and feels like light. And what it is just a great manual gradient of me shifting three different oranges on top of each other until they become the next one. And I wanted to feel like the fringe on the side is like a manifestation of light, like I could literally comb it and hold it, and that it spills off to the side. So I started to keep my longer fringe on the sides, partly because I was like, oh, this is kind of like a moment where the light is sort of continuing off of the weaving. So here you can see also the pink is the only part that kind of continues off. And then the foam shadows are also moments where it continues off. So I kind of intentionally keep the side fringes as if it's a continuation of light and shadow. And then at the bottom, I think the fringe, I started to incorporate a lot more fringe at the bottom, again, partly because I was like, I have to tell people, I have to give them a hint that it is textile and it's woven. And so that's where I was starting to increase like the more imperfections or more suggestions of the hand near the finishing or the edges, and more, I guess, like suggestions of things having come off of a loom or like, yeah, with this is actually two panels that were woven one after the other where I like mapped out like which areas where I shift color. And then I usually display them just right on top of each other so that they overlap a little bit. They're not sewn together. And you can see that one of them was cut and the other one was the first thing that was tied onto the loom. And so there's these moments that are, again, suggestions to people who are looking for some understanding of what they're looking at. Because I think other people have said like, oh, this is not what I would expect to see possible in textile. This is not, I'm not expecting to see a giant parking lot or these beautiful colors painted in this way. And I don't expect to think of this as something that would have come off of a digital loom. And that's such an like a great honor for me because that means that I'm doing something creative as opposed to just trying to translate something from one like a one-to-one sort of moment. So yeah, I think that the fringe has been like, okay, we need to show more and more of it. And then when it came to this piece as well as this piece, that was when I was like, I think I liked the painting before I wove it. So let's incorporate more of that. And then that just became another moment in which I think it actually makes the whole piece more vibrant and beautiful and gives it a lot more movement. So yeah, I think a lot of it is just kind of responding to moments in which I've failed to communicate and wanting to reinsert that more.
Yeah, thank you. I really liked your fringe. I also like to have my own fringes on my works. And even before I started working with painted warp, I, I usually I keep fringe just because it's literally continuing your piece, even it's finished, but on the other hand, it's kind of not finished till the end. So this impression of continuous or something like this. Yeah, and thank you, Tali, for your comments above. I really happy that you're also here with us. And also, I have another question, and then I will pass the microphone to somebody else. Can you also speak about Loom Room a little bit? What is your next plans? Because I know that you had some deliverings or something like this.
So with Loom Room, we are, yes, we, um, I just put up a solo show and we're also sort of dealing with like everything at once with Loom Room. So that's been quite a struggle the past month of getting things like being on top of things. I don't think I've felt on top of things, but I think it's just because we have so much going on. But Loom Room is actually moving from the studio that I've been in for all these years. And so I'm actually going to be subletting this space and in April. And I'm just gonna keep that front area where you see the flat files. That's gonna be my space still. I'll store my art in that front space, but I'm subletting it. And so Loom Room is actually moving out of the studio and we're going to a dedicated space just for Loom Room because in the past year it has grown to be it has outgrown my studio and we can't really share anymore, which is amazing. But yeah, we've just had so many amazing artists come from all over to Chicago to weave on our loom and to really be excited about the different types of projects that we have here that it's just like its own thing now, which is so wonderful. And so we're moving to a new space and transforming that new space into something that like really is dedicated to digital weaving. So one of the things we were dealing with this past month was painting the walls to seal all the debris and the dust that was coming off of the ceiling and the brick. And then yeah, we also, yeah, are just adding a lot of things to it. So it's been kind of slow. But also a very exciting delivery came that we ordered a second TC2. So that loom room will now have two looms where artists can hopefully weave side by side. And the other loom that we've purchased is half the size of the giant one that we currently have. So hopefully one of them can kind of act as a sampling, another sampling loom. And then we can also put on two different designs of warps at the same time so that everyone can kind of just continue to be challenged by each other when they're in the space and working on two different things. So yeah, loom room is expanding and we're adding more looms and we're just gonna be once we reopen after being closed for 5 months, we're going to just like hit the ground running with a painted warp workshop in the summer. So yeah, lots of things that are really just kind of coming down the line and I'm really excited about them.
Wow, that's very amazing. Wish you luck with all your movements and with the new loom. And yeah, this is very mm, great news.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is big.
thank you.
So this
Um,
new loom, it's like a medium size or the small size of TC2.
It's the medium size. So it's they call it the two wide. So I don't remember what that is in the centimeters, but
I think it's the same which we have here.
okay, cool. Yeah. And I know that you really have like wanted to learn more about warping and painting for the TC2. So unfortunately, I know you can't join us in the summer, but yeah, it's really been something that like a lot of people have been interested in, and we're like, let's do this again because it's so fun. But let's do it with more people because it's a lot of work, as you are no you understand. Um, and I think I think it'll be really exciting for everyone to maybe just weave like paint a little bit and then get to understand how to reason about it and make it feel a little less like a failure on one person's part. Let's do it all together.
Yeah, when you make failures together, it's more fun.
Yes, that's a good point.
And also, can I ask last question, please?
Can I just jump in super quickly because I think can we stop sharing because then we will see your faces on the big screen. It's going to be so nice. Also, yeah, great.
Yeah, I wanted just to ask about how do you came up with the business model of Loom Room? Because, for instance, I can't imagine myself planning some kind of, this money issue or the budgets or grants and so on. So, do you have any education in this field, or you have your co-founder who helps you?
Yeah, my co-director and I do not have education in business. So we are figuring it out as we go, but always asking everyone else we know who has run a business or an arts organization, or just has some sort of skill that would be useful, like law or accounting and taxes and banking, those things for advice. And I've been talking about the concept of Loom Room for 10 years now. So this was something that actually my professor in school, John Paul Morabito, which who you've taken a class
Mm,
with,
mhm.
um, they had kind of whispered that in a lot of people's ears, like, hey, there's nowhere to continue to use this loom. Somebody, a bunch of you students should maybe get together and put money together and start a space as a collective. And I tried. I was like, okay, cool. Instruction noted. I'm gonna try to do that. And the cohort that I graduated with, life happens. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of people, and a lot of relationships to manage. And often, starting a studio isn't really on people's top list of things to do.
Mhm.
And I, which was good, honestly, because I think it would have turned out really differently if I had jumped into that back then with more than one other person, because one other person is already a lot to manage everything that we want the thing to be. And so over the years, it was just talking about this vision, and then having, again, other people kind of give their advice and their suggestions on it. And so eventually, over time, when I was building my own studio, I received a grant to buy my first floor loom. And so I actually started a loom room by just renting out that floor loom to other people. So it didn't have a TC2, but that was kind of the goal, to eventually have a TC2 space with also a lot more other looms and other equipment. And over time, I received a lot of individual artist grants that helped me build up the studio, pay for all the smaller equipment that was much more affordable than, a loom that's several tens of thousands of dollars. There's a sports car, which I'm like, I don't have a grant for that, but um, then yes, then my co-founder and I, when we finally were at a stage where we were like, maybe we can work on getting donations from a few private donors, and maybe become a nonprofit, or sort of take on a different, like some kind of loan. So we kind of considered a lot of different options, and we decided that maybe just us personally self-funding might be the easiest route, more immediate route. So he is the one who sort of did the initial investment on the loom, and I'm sort of have giving me the opportunity to purchase the loom over time. So like as a loom, as a rent to own sort of model. And hopefully with the business, then we are self-funding through our own funds as well as grants. And um, we were able to actually, with the rental fees, cover a lot of the overhead, which is kind of amazing for the first year of a business, to be able to um, not lose money, which is we didn't make money, but we didn't lose anything, which is great. So that's where we also, I think after that year, we were like, you know what, I think to have a truly viable business that might be can sustain itself, you need to have more than one loom, because if one loom is down, you don't have income. So it's quite difficult to actually maintain that. And it's also quite difficult to make your own art by closing your business and not making money. Um, so there's like different, yeah, sort of we're constantly trying to better understand and reason about the business side of things. But yeah, it's not easy to run a business and invite strangers into your space to use the equipment, but I think it makes us better artists, and it makes us more connected to the community, and I think we're both really happy with it. But it is like, yeah, outside of just the loom purchase, there's a lot of expenses, and we're just trying to make sure that like we again can actually sustain that over time and not feel like, oh, loom room might disappear in a year or two. That's definitely not the goal. So yeah, we're always kind of just learning and trying to adjust.
Can I ask also like a question that is connected to that? You said that you're not only working with the local artists in Chicago and the areas around it, but also with the international artists. So it's quite possible that people from different countries that, for instance, don't have TC2, they would come to your place and they would work there.
Yes. We've welcomed a lot of people from Canada, actually. Um, and I mean, they're right next door to us, so it's a pretty simple hop over. But a lot of artists in Canada, they used to have a facility in Toronto where there was a sort of really similar model that I actually was really inspired by in 2019. And I had thought to travel often to Toronto to use their loom. And then because of the global pandemic, the borders were closed. And then uh, in 2023, they went bankrupt. So the loom is no longer available, and that was when actually a lot of Canadian artists came to us and were like, "Hey, the one place in Canada that was also like a rental open studio model is gone, so we're coming to you," which is kind of great because we've been able to welcome people from a different access point, different kind of artists who deal with different funding in a different country. So that's really been nice. And then we're hoping to welcome someone from Mexico who's waiting on funds to travel. And we've had people inquire from Australia and India and and various places in Europe as well. So it's really exciting because there are other places, like other residencies that they can go to, and I'm always flattered when we get inquiries from people who are like, we're excited about what you guys are doing, which is not a residency, but um, no one else is doing what you're doing. And in terms of proposing experimental warps for like lots of people to try at once. And so I think that's something that we're really carving out that I'm really excited that people from other countries and other cities are excited to travel to come spend time with us to get to know us and to be around other artists who are in the field as well.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Sounds also like a huge, huge network that grows because of your work, and the interest to the weaving on DC2 grows because of that as well.
I think it's definitely growing, and we're really connecting with people from all over the world, which I mean, that's how Christina, you and I are connected, and I think that's really, really amazing. And I think there's so few. We're working with this niche tool which sometimes can feel kind of lonely and isolating and hard to find the information for how to do certain things. But I think because more and more people are getting into it and making it their own, like now we're actually connected to people like automatically in many other countries. And I think that's so special.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Are you coming to Norway to join the conference of DC2? 30
Oh,
years.
I have not, we have not decided that. We would love to come to Norway. But yeah, we haven't talked about it yet.
Okay, okay, great. Does anybody else have comments or questions? I think maybe we can have an extra 5 minutes. Okay, but then I will have a question. I was meaning to ask you before because you had such an interesting conversation with Tali and with Christina about the way you work and about your process. And I think the way you use the term translation is very beautiful in regarding to your method and to the way you work. And I was wondering, how do you sort of trace this losses and like alterations that happen during this translation? And do you keep them in mind when you do the next piece? And if it influences your choice of materials? Because when you were showing us this piece you made out of orange threads and like 3 different types of orange threads, I was thinking, how do you catch the light every time differently? Do you think how you did it before, and does it influence your work when you kind of do it in you or like you work in another piece?
Yeah, it's intuitive now. I used to map out, oh, like at this pick number, I'm gonna change the weft. And that quickly became like I think there's so much planning that's involved even in just the design. I was like, well, I don't want to plan that. I just want to respond to color. And I want to, I also get bored weaving. So sometimes I'm just like, I just need to change the color so that I get excited about something else. And I think that's actually how that pink and orange line ended up entering my work was I'm like, I really want to just change the color and see something. And it ended up being like, oh, every time I change the color, but the image continues, it looks like a shadow, or it looks like this brilliant moment of light. And it actually was really interesting because I wasn't photographing, I wasn't noticing the way that the light fell onto the buildings before I started to weave like that. So I started weaving with the pink and like the color transitions, and then looking at it off the loom, and I was like, that looks like shadow and sunlight. And then I started to see it in life, which is a funny moment because I often use life, things I see in life to put into the work. But um, yeah, I think that was when I was like, I kind of like this as a theme, that I'm always inserting this moment, this light flare into the work, and it's a color and it's a weft transition. It's not built into the file, so I don't decide when I don't pre-plan when it enters the composition. I kind of just I see the image in my head in Photoshop, and I'm like, you know what? I think right, and now that I'm bored as I'm weaving this thing, I think this would be a good time to insert that like pink or the orange. And that's sort of like how I decide that now. And it's only when I might be trying to match a different panel or trying to match a different panel, or maybe even match some other work in sort of like the amount of light that might be appearing in across different pieces. I might be a little bit more conscientious, but I have gotten pretty comfortable with just letting certain things be intuitive. And sometimes they don't work out and they don't look as nice as they do in my head. But I think that if I pre-plan everything, it kind of takes away the reason for why I need to be in front of the loom.
Mm.
And yeah, if I and that's sort of how I just try not to think too hard about it. I think really hard about too many things already. So certain elements in the actual weaving, I'm like, oh, this is something that is meant to happen when I'm weaving at the loom, and I either get inspired by a color that I encounter, or I get inspired in the middle of thinking about the piece that I'm like, let's change it. Yeah.
Okay, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you so much. Uh, okay, but then I think it's time for us to wrap up. And I just once again want to say a big thank you for Hope, that you joined us today and that you told us about your practice and that you guided us through the processes that you're going through when you weave and when you create your artworks. And it's a special pleasure because it's our last conversation in terms of Christina's exhibition, and it's been amazing 6 weeks of super intense like artist talks and lectures, and it's wonderful that we have this meeting today, and we have this meeting today with you, Hope. So thank you once again.
Thank
Um,
you.
Yeah, thank you for your talk and also for your poetic attention to the weaving. It is so nice. And also, I like how you write in your Instagram about weaving. So, yeah.
I'm really thank you so much for both of you for inviting me. This was a really lovely opportunity to talk about some new things that I'm thinking about in my work and for us to get connected. So I'm really grateful.
Thank you. Well, then have a lovely day. And for those of us who are a bit more Eastern, have a lovely night. And hope we will stay in touch and continue our conversation.
Yes, please do. And yes, have a lovely evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.